Hello and welcome to Wizards, Warriors and Words, a fantasy writing advice podcast. I'm Jed Herne, author of Across the Broken Stars.
I'm Anna Smith Spark, author of The Court of Broken Knives. What?
Okay. I'm Rob Hayes, author of books.
Many books, many good books.
Many books.
Great
I'm trying to
start.
remember what they're all called at this point.
There's no
I'm Dyrk
rules.
Ashton, author of the Paternus trilogy and all the books that those two put out.
Great. I should also clarify, just for people listening the first time, that is not Anna Smith Spark. That is Michael Fletcher. Although we should definitely have her on sometime to chat about all things writing. This episode is going to be about secondary characters. So our primary character usually gets a lot of focus when we're talking about how to write better stories. But I think secondary characters are equally important because without them, it can just feel like you have this one really vividly imagined person in a world of cardboard cutouts. So what do we think about when it comes to our secondary characters in our stories?
So I've stumbled across the trick to writing fantastic secondary characters, which
Ooh.
I will share with you.
Wow.
So you have to start out. Yes. Start off. What's most important here? You have to be really dumb. Luckily, I am. So what you do is you think that this is actually a primary character, and you write the entire book giving Ephra from the City of Sacrifice series her own chapters because she is a key point of view character. And then after you've written the entire book, you go, you know what? That's too many fucking point of view characters. I want to chop it down to 2. And so you rewrite all of her scenes from somebody else's point of view. And all this depth comes through because you wrote all her stuff. You know exactly what she's thinking now. So do way more work than you have to do. Do it completely ass backward. And it's way too much work. But in the end, you'll have this character who is actually as deep and well thought out as all of your main characters because she actually was supposed to be one.
I think I know another trick. I heard another trick which ties into that one.
Do share.
But with slightly less effort, I feel, which is take all of your secondary characters and before you write them and make a list of 10 things about them that will never make it into the story. They might be things like, this character hates the color blue because it reminds them of the sky. I don't know, whatever. But there's just these 10 things about this character that you never intend to actually put into a book. And then they make their way into the book. Mm-hmm. Just through the natural process of wizardry that is authoring, which is... It's kind of like what Michael said there, but with slightly less effort because you don't then have to rewrite an entire book from a different point of view.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea.
But I mean, the lesson there is the same though. You know, if you have a little background. Now, I do write a lot of background for my characters, including the secondary characters, but I wouldn't say I write out all these. I don't hit all these numbers. Basically, like my characters are a little easier to research, some of them, because they're characters from myth. So I decide which characters from myth. A lot of them were multiple ones, and then I know what that's like. Then I know what they're like, and I never use any of that stuff. Like Rob said, it kind of seeps in, but at least I know, and somehow the readers. It comes across to readers that the author knows what they're talking about, right? And that there is a past for this character, even if you never really say what it is. And things, little hints like if somebody comments about something that happened in the past, those things come organically. I see that kind of thing get forced in, especially TV. Remember that time in, Tijuana? Oh yeah, that was a terrible mission. Let's do that again. You see that so much and it's so forced. It's like,
as you know, Bob.
Yeah, it just gets, for me, secondary characters, I have to think about how are they going to serve the story. what about the world and about the other characters and the main characters in particular are we going to learn by having this character in there? Otherwise, they really don't need to be there, right? If we can learn something more about the world, if there's something they can teach, right, the main characters, then they're important, I think. Because we only really learn about characters through their interaction with other characters. So I try to make all of my secondary characters those kinds of individuals that can help add to the greater depth of the story or the growth or learning of the main character.
That's a really useful way to think about it, and that's sort of how I think about it as well, in terms of thinking about all your characters as part of this sort of interconnected web, and through all of those different relationships between them, it's sort of commenting on the story's theme or concerns in slightly different ways. So maybe you have your main character who, for example, thinks that money is the root of all evil. Then you have a secondary character who's like, no, money's great. You can use it to like help get people out of bad situations, whatever. Then you have another character who has a slightly different slant on that theme. And through all of the different perspectives on it, it makes it more complicated and more interesting for the readers to explore. An interesting thing, picking up on some of the things that we're going around with here, is we're all talking about how it's very important to sort of consider the story from the secondary character's perspective, which I totally agree with. But how do you balance that with not getting overwhelmed? Because if you have dozens of secondary characters, is it too difficult to try to keep track of everything from that? How do you kind of create secondary characters in a more simplified way if you do have a big cast and you don't kind of have the mental energy to juggle all of their perspectives?
I think the one way to do this is harkening back to our previous episode of editing. So I mean, I've recently just written a book with 17 characters. I mean, there's obviously more characters, but it focuses. There's one main character, and then there's 16. Actually, there's 15. I've been making this mistake the entire way through because I can't count. So there's like 15 other characters who all have at least one point of view, but they are secondary characters. And when I went into it, I had no idea who most of them were. They all just had a name. And it was only throughout, as the story progressed, that I figured out who the characters were individually, which is one of those things that I can now go back and change in the editing to make them stand out more and make them more in line with who they are or are eventually, but back at the beginning. So yeah, I mean, editing, it's harkening back to the previous episode, but it saves lives.
What about you, Mike? Oh, sorry, Rob. That's right.
Go ahead, Mike.
I approach secondary characters really the same way I approach main characters. When I'm writing their bits, even though it's not from their point of view, I have some idea in my head who they are. Now, I don't plan it all out, but each character has sort of like a feeling to them for me. And then I literally role play in my head their scenes. I actually don't really think of secondary characters as secondary. They're as crucial sort of to the story. I don't plan much, so I don't put a lot of thought. Secondary characters, to me, they're not there as foils. They're not there to make the plot work. They're there because of something like the main character did. And they're just part of the sort of ongoing train wreck fallout that I'm, sharing with the poor reader.
Yeah, I mean, that I was basically just going to say sort of the same thing, is that secondary characters, to me, besides helping, do all the things I talked about, they are like, they'd say that the bad guy is the hero of his own story. Each of the secondary characters is there thinking about things, thinking about what's happening, acting within the environment. I have a lot of like large group scenes where a lot of characters are interacting at the same time. And even if one just comes in at the end and says something, in my mind, they are the central character of their story. And they're there all the time. They're always thinking about what's going on. They don't just like pop up like a cardboard target and deliver their line and disappear. And we've read books where that kind of happens. I try, or I hope they don't in my books, but I just try to make sure that I'm thinking about the entire milieu of what's happening and what's going on, so that when they do speak, it's within context of all that, and hopefully helps bring about the kinds of the fact that they really exist and have existed through this whole thing. Does that make I don't know if
that does, yeah.
Like Fletcher says, where he likes to role play all of his characters, so that he's a big schizophrenic mess. Imagining a scene, you've got a scene, you know what's happening, but then maybe try imagining it from your secondary character's point of view. So, I mean, it can be hard work if like Dyrk, you've got like a dozen characters all standing around having a massive confab and you're trying to imagine it from every single one of their point of views. It's a lot of work, but if you've just got sort of a scene with a few characters in, it's obviously a lot easier. You can just be like, okay, how would this scene go? Obviously same thing's happening, but how would this scene go from this character? And it'll help you give them a lot of depth and understanding as to why they're in that particular scene and what they're doing in it, what they hope to achieve in the scene that you've put them in.
Yeah, and I run into, I don't know if you guys have run into this, but where in a rewrite, back in the edit, I'll realize, okay, I've had this character comment on this or bring up this point. And I'm like, it really shouldn't be that character. It should be this character. And I'll actually switch who says the lines and then reword, because they all speak in a slightly different way. And I think that's important too with secondary characters, is give them a distinct voice. Whether it be an accent or the way they speak or just how they say things, are they always a little understated in the way they talk, or are they big and gregarious and overblown in the things that they say? They speak in grand hyperboles and stuff like that. So I'll change that, but that happens a lot where, maybe Freya says something, but I'm like, Peter really should have said that because he would have more knowledge of that subject, so I'll change it that way.
Keeping that like consistent tone with the character. We're just going to pause quickly for this episode's featured book, which actually ties in kind of nicely to this discussion about secondary characters. The book is Fires of the Dead by myself. I'm not holding a copy if you're watching the video feed right now, because it's currently getting the cover redesigned for the 1-year anniversary. And also because the first cover was made by me and it was a little bit crappy. So depending on my editing skills, it might be here somewhere. The new cover might be here if you're watching on the YouTube feed, or it might not.
I want to see the old one.
Oh, okay, I'll get it up. I'm wearing pajama pants, so you might see pajama pants for a second. Anyway. There is...
Come on, show us your jammies.
Damn it.
Jeez.
That's not
bad.
So yeah, if you are not benefiting from the video feed on the YouTube channel, apologies. Basically, the book cover is just sort of like a parchment map with a sword on it and some blood. Anyway, the book is about a group of mercenaries, some of whom have fire powers, and they are going into this desolate wasteland of a forest to try to steal a dead sorcerer's skull. And the book is told from the point of views of the different characters within this particular thieving crew. And for me, it was quite an interesting writing experience because I'd usually written things that were single point of views. It was very easy keeping track of the main character, but perhaps the flaw of that was that my secondary characters didn't get as much attention from me. But with this, because I was forced to do point of views from every person in the main kind of mercenary crew, it really forced me to see how they approached the world in different ways, how they solved similar problems in their own unique methods, and basically just how they were different as people. So that's Fires of the Dead by Jed Herne. Link in the show notes, as always. And yeah, hopefully the redesigned cover will be up by now. So it'll look a bit better than that one. But yes, back to our discussion about secondary characters. I think one of the things that's sort of coming up here as a recurring thing is giving them a ghost and giving them a goal. So what I mean by that is giving them a ghost as in something important in their backstory. It doesn't have to be a traumatic event. It doesn't have to be a stereotypical like, oh, I'm an orphan because my parents died, so that's going to motivate me to do these things. It could be as simple as like they, lost control at something, or they, something didn't go as well as they wanted it to go. And then that sort of led to them becoming who they are. And then the goal is how they have sort of taken what has happened with their ghost and how they're channeling it into the story. I think giving secondary characters a goal, whether it's only, a small thing like they want to win this conversation, or they want to beat the character in this race or whatever, for me, that really adds a lot of depth to them. And it feels realistic as well. And it comes back to that whole idea of what we're talking about as to how they should, be sort of the central character in their own story.
I think, and a lot of characters can have multiple secondary characters can have multiple things like that. Like this character wants to prove themselves to this other character. This character really has kind of a crush on this other character. This character, or it can be the same character can have this, all these things going on. And those are just the kinds of things that real people deal with. It's always a little bigger, bigger, larger than life, but it doesn't, everything doesn't have to be, and the way, because of their past, the way they react. Like, if two characters come upon a bad guy, one of them wants to question him and the other one just cuts their head off, because that's the kind of character they are. Those just like simple things like
Dragons group I've ever played with.
Yeah, but those are the kinds of things that make characters distinct and feel more real.
I think another trick you can sort of use, especially if you're sort of fairly new to it, I suppose, is to pick a secondary character and write a scene. Just doesn't have to be a scene that's going to go in the book. It might just be them and their buddies sitting around a campfire cooking stew, and them talking about their past, or it can be, essentially a little short story of something they did, but just get inside the character's head by writing something from their point of view. And
or just write the whole book like that, like Mike does.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Do it the hard way.
But it's just a way of helping figure out who the character is and, their voice, that character's voice, which will then hopefully, even though they're not going to be a point of view character, will bleed onto the page through another character's point of view.
It's kind of like how actors do like method acting, where they, do all this extra getting into character that doesn't really come across on the screen because the camera is not recording, but it helps when they actually get into the role. And in the same way, you can do method writing where you're sort of writing about things that aren't going to be in the story, but will make it clearer how that character should behave in the story.
There's the title of your book on writing.
Method writing.
Method writing.
How to become a crazy writer for fame and fortune.
I'm not sure most writers have either of those things, but
that's why we sell.
What is this fame and fortune you talk about?
I believe that Michael R. Fletcher has a monopoly on those, so you will have to ask him personally.
Right.
What are our other thoughts on secondary characters before we start to wrap this episode up?
I like to use them to lure main characters, into stupid conversations. I like it's a chance to sort of because real life, all conversations don't revolve around moving a plot, right? And so sometimes, and there are nice moments, and I know there are writers who are like, oh, if it doesn't move the plot, cut it. I'm of the fuck that school. I'm of the, if it's a nice moment and, it sort of hooks you in the character a little bit more, then maybe it stays. But because your secondary characters they're different people. They have different motivations, different opinions, different backgrounds. I love dialogue. I love conversations between main and secondary characters where, you know, they will disagree over something, and you know, it's a great chance to sort of to learn something about both characters. Yeah.
One thing that we haven't brought up, and for some reason Joe Abercrombie popped into my head, is physical traits of secondary characters. Making the, you know, if all of your characters are 6 feet tall, 175 pounds with no scars and dressed the same, you know, it's kind of boring and difficult to picture them in your head. Sometimes I go overboard, especially in book 1, but I kind of did that on purpose in describing the physicality of certain characters. And that goes away as the book goes through because I don't feel it's as necessary. But, you know, having a character, you know, characters that do have certain physical traits, and anybody who's read the First Law trilogy, you know, Abercrombie almost gets cartoonish in how he describes his characters, with great bulging eyes and tattoos all down, breathing real hard all the time. You know, it's really kind of funny, but it's fun. And you don't have to go quite that far, but the characters do have to be different physically. You know what I mean? And very often the way they look is very much how they're perceived, even in the way they act. Though it is fun sometimes to have a great big grizzly looking character who has a really high voice and you know, is very, you know, might be very meek until the fight comes on, and then they just kick everybody's ass, you know. But but that sets up this fun dichotomy. So those kinds of things, the physicality of characters, secondary characters, is important as well.
I think you can get away without over describing them by, you know, sort of, you pick something and it might be like, this character has a bushy mustache, and then you let the reader fill in the rest. Basically, you sort of, it's very much sort of relying on the reader's imagination, but that's obviously that's a trick that you can use anyway. It's one of the best things you can do as an author. But yeah, just give them something almost cartoonish, like, you know, they're very proud of their big bushy mustache, and let the reader fill in the rest of the blanks around them, which is it helps describe the character in a physical way, and also, you know, gives the character something you've created, something that they didn't have before that is important to them, their mustache. Or whatever doesn't have to be.
Or we need an episode on all the things you don't write that the reader gets anyway. The things you don't say. Yep. That paint a picture, because there's
subtext almost
art to that.
In filmmaking, we talk a lot about what you don't shoot and leave out is just as important as what you do shoot and leave in, and that's the same with books, you know. And I have, you know, said, well, I think I need to tell this, and it's like, you know, I really don't, you know. 1 or 2 lines will fill that in. And a lot of that trick is to writing efficiently is experience, and being able to know that before you spend 3 weeks writing those scenes, right?
Or before writing an entire book.
Was that a shot at me? Are you taking a shot at me? What was that?
Never, Mike. Never. Hugs.
Stung. Don't touch me. Don't touch me. I'm still angry.
On that charming or confrontational note, I'm not sure. Do we have any other quick thoughts to share before we wrap this one up?
I don't know. I'd say, like, remember that secondary characters can grow as well. You know, they can grow and change, and that can be just as important to the story and the readers as a primary character growth. Because, I mean, one of the things to take into account is that your favorite character within the book, because as an author, we do tend to have a favorite character, may not be everybody else's favorite character in the book.
I'm often surprised reading reviews or comments on what characters people like and which ones they don't. And some of them have very little screen time, and they're a favorite character for some reason.
I was a big fan of Naga.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad. See?
But that's a completely different aside. I'm very not aware I'm reading Dyrk's book at the moment.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is you never know as an author, because the reception of the book lies in the reader always. No matter what you try to do, it may not come across, but something you never tried to do, you'll find comes across and resonates really strongly with readers. And you're like, oh, wow, I guess I did do that. And, you know, it might've been subconscious, but you were consistent with it and you did do it. And that's actually almost a better feeling than when I'm like, yes, that's what I meant to do.
What surprises me is when you create a character who's an arsehole. Because I did this. I created it in my first book, Heresy Within. I created a character who was an utter arsehole, irredeemable pile of trash. And people loved him.
Uh-huh. Yep.
I mean, I could not have made the person a more despicable waste of human space. And yet people liked him because he was charismatic. Mm-hmm. So I made him the bad guy in the second book. Like, right, you liked him? Well, no, I'm not allowing that.
Did people still like him then?
And they still liked him though, didn't they?
No, they didn't.
Oh.
Not in the second book. But funnily enough, one of the characters in the first book that pretty much everybody just said they didn't like her at all. They're like, she should have died on the bridge back then. I was like, right, okay, well, she's, you know, secondary character. I was like, I'm going to make her likable. I'm going to make her relatable, and you're going to like her by the end of the second book. So,
yeah, and I have like two types of characters. I have like kind of the regular human young people characters, and then I have these, you know, ancient mythological characters. And you could split right down the middle the people in reviews that say, I loved the two young characters, I want more of them. I wasn't as interested in these ancient mythological beings. And then the right next review is, I love the ancient mythological beings. We could have just followed them and done completely without the two young characters. So you never know how people are going to go. So that means either I did something right, very right, or something very wrong. I'm not exactly sure, but you just never know.
We could probably do an entire episode on how to come to terms with reviews.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, we definitely should. Let's put that down as a future thing to explore, because that is
and then how to deal with reviews or not deal with it.
How to take the constructive things from reviews and ignore the bullshit.
Yeah.
Or aka the things saying you're not doing it well. But yes, definitely that should be something to explore in the future. All right. Well, on that note, thank you everybody for listening or watching. Let's spice things up a little bit. Normally I just end these episodes there, but I would love for people who are listening to watching to this, if you have read any of our books, send through what your favorite secondary character was and why. And then we'll try to maybe read out some listener responses next episode when we get together and record it. So you can either drop a comment below if you're watching the YouTube video, or you can email wizardswarriorswords@gmail.com. And I will read all of those and go through it. So let us know what your favorite secondary character is from one of our books, or it can be from another book if you haven't read anything by us or you don't think our book's very good. And we will try to read through some of those next episode, and then maybe we can be surprised by the results, or we will find that that's what most people think. So thank you everybody for listening. We will see you next time. Thank you for listening to Wizards, Warriors and Words. We hope you learned something useful. Let us know what you thought about this episode in the comments below. We'll do our best to respond. We'd also love to hear your questions. Comment with your questions below and we might even answer it on the show. If you haven't already, please subscribe and like this video. This helps more people discover the show. Wizards, Warriors and Words is jointly hosted by Dyrk Ashton, Michael R. Fletcher, Rob J. Hayes and Jed Herne, with editing by Jed Herne. Our music comes from Michael R. Fletcher, and our artwork is by Felix Ortiz. Thank you again for watching. Now go and write extraordinary stories. We'll see you next time.